It's great to be back with you. Looks a little bit familiar. I have a sense that there's been some movement toward the front over here. It's kind of, we're Lutherans. You don't want to rush into anything. You want to consider all aspects before you act. That's good. Good to see a lot of familiar faces, and appreciate the opportunity to be with you today. Going to have the kids sing. Cool. They do a bit of dancing around during this song, and you know that it's always okay for everybody to dance along with the kids. So if you feel compelled to throw your arms in the air with a few amens or claps, it will be okay. I checked with the bishop last week, and he said it was allowed. So we'll go for it. I want to start our reflections this morning by talking about my dog. I have a 12-year-old French bulldog that I inherited from my son. Now, French bulldogs are inherently cute. Everyone thinks they're the cutest thing on the face of the earth. And sometimes Radar is the cutest. But he's growing older, and I think his personality is changing a bit. Normally, he goes outside and goes only far enough to do his thing, turns around and comes back in the house. He does not like snow. He will not walk in the snow. If there's not bare concrete, he won't go. And he doesn't particularly care for grass unless he's running out to the garden and back. Used to be, he could be anywhere and you could say, Radar, and you would hear the pitter-pat, and he would be right there. If he's outside now and I say, Radar, he will either totally ignore me or turn and face the other way. And I have two choices. Either I have to go get him, in which he immediately trots so carefully and happily in front of me all the way back to the house as if he knew it was time to do that. Or occasionally, his ears will perk up and he'll turn, and it's if he just remembered Radar was his name. And it was he who was being called, and he will jump up and run back. Keeping a connection with Radar and calling him my dog sometimes is difficult, just as it's difficult to keep our relationship with God. When you want somebody to do something, how hard it can be. It can be hard in the family when you say, who's going to do the supper dishes? And there's this long silence. And then the most guilty feeling of the children will get up and they'll go start clearing the table for you. We try so hard to get people to do what we want, and it's so hard to get a response. My ultimate story about getting preachers to respond to us, I experienced when I was probably at 11 or 12 years old. It was the days immediately after the county fair, and sometimes some of the showers of livestock would leave some of their livestock at the fairgrounds for sometimes a period of time, and they just kept them in the pens and in the show sheds, and they hired people to go out and take care of them, to give them food and water and make sure everything was okay. On this particular day, I went with the owner's oldest son, John. We were going to take care of some hogs. Now, in one pen were two of the biggest sows that I had ever seen. They were big, 400 pounds, 500 pounds. They stretched from one end of the crate to the other. And as you can imagine, if you put two people in a tight space and only feed them occasionally, what happens? Do they grow to like one another? Chances not. They start to get testy about things, right? You're in my space. That's my corner of the blanket. That's my doll, not yours. Well, these two sows, they were fighting over who was going to get to the trough first. And they got immediately brutal and started to bloody one another. If you've never seen full-grown hogs fight, they can be really nasty to one another. And here are these two enormous creatures fighting like mad over their food instead of being happy to be fed. And they're managing to spill most of it. They would not respond to any yells or gestures that we made. So finally John said, well, I hate to do this, but, and laying on the ground by the pen was some lumber that was being used for repairs, and there was a really fine 2x4 about 5 feet long. And John took the 2x4 and gave each sow a whack across the side of the head. It got their attention. There were a couple of dazed looks for a couple of moments, and then they looked at each other as if they'd never seen the other one before. And they looked what was left of the food, and they immediately both quietly moved over to the food and shared the trough and had a fine evening. But it took quite a blow to get their attention to receive a message. Sometimes it seems that we can be that way. This morning's gospel talks about the conversion and the calling of Saul to become whom we know as Paul, to whom we recognize as being members of St. Paul's Lutheran Church. This is the guy. This is your model. Now Saul was not a very nice guy. You kind of have to wonder what his parenting was like. He probably didn't go to a very good kindergarten where they could teach him some manners and some respect. He was extremely intelligent. He was extremely committed to being a good Jew. He studied hard. He studied the law. He debated with the rabbis. He learned all that we could. And he tried to act out, to live out, to follow what he felt God and the law were asking him to do. What was that? Well, it was fundamentally protect the law, make sure the law is followed, that the law is not abused, make sure that people do what they're supposed to do. And there must have been a little bit of John Ballard in Saul, because he basically said if they don't follow the law, if they particularly become one of those Christians that we've seen around, then get out your 2x4s and give them a couple of whacks. It's okay. He was anathema to the Christians. He was everything they feared about the Jewish community, and their anger at those who were, to them, abusing and misusing the law. There were many people that Jesus could have called. There were probably some good people in town besides Saul. If you were to call HR and say, I'd like a dozen resumes for the top candidates for being followers and spokespersons for this Jesus, I don't think that Saul's resume would have made the cut. But then he did make the cut, because he did call Saul. And And it bewilders Saul at first, and then I believe it converts Saul. Saul becomes the epitome of the person who says, I can't follow Jesus. He can't possibly. I'm everything that Jesus is not. And I'm not everything that Jesus is. Why? Why would he want me? Why would he want me? Maybe he wants to get revenge on me for all I've done to the Christians. He's going to set me up. I'm going to say yes, and then he's going to take me out in the desert, and I'll be done for. Saul had to have some major questions. When your worst enemy might come forward to you and say, hey, I've got a deal I'd like to share with you. Maybe we can work on it together. What do? Do you joyfully embrace your enemy and say, that sounds good, I'll call my bank right away and arrange some financing? Most of us would walk away, would we not? We would say, you're up to something. What are you up to? What do you want with me? Why did you come to me? I got that kind of email about a week ago. Somehow I got a text message that, hi, sorry to be so late with this, but my name is Paul. I understand you're the owner of the property at 520 Fayette. You want to sell it? Well, ain't this a scam? Because I don't have any Pauls that have my number. And no, I'm not interested in selling the house. You're up to something, right? We all get those kinds of calls. Have you ever thought that about God's call to you? Has there ever been anything that Pastor Sandlin or I or Pastor Munker have said in the sermon and you've said, I'm kind of feeling called to this, but I don't think so. Can't be me. Why would it be? Why would God want me to do that? Why would God want me to do that which is so different to who I've been and how I've been? But God's always that way. You know who I wanted to be when I was a little kid? My first great hero was John Wayne. And I thought, man, I want to be a Marine. I want to go over the top of the trench with my rifle in hand and, we'll show those guys who's boss. And then I got a little older and I did a little more reading and I thought, I don't think so. I don't think that was God that made John Wayne a hero in my eyes. It was the TV station that made him a hero in my eyes. Who else have we looked at in our lives and thought, maybe that's what I'm called to do? I thought for a while I wanted to be a chemist. And when I almost blew up the school, I decided this probably, I don't follow minute directions real well. This is probably not a good thing. It surprised a lot of people in my hometown when I said I'm going to seminary. Surprised a lot of people. Surprised the heck out of me because it wasn't what I anticipated. Ultimately, it was a lot more than I had anticipated, and I'd never do it any other way. But at the time, it sounded really weird. I had classmates that were getting jobs as chemists with big oil companies, and the salaries they were getting were phenomenal. And I'm thinking, and you're going to go take a church and you're going to make about a fourth of what he's making, and you're going to work more hours. But is it the voice of God? What calls you to meals on wheels? What calls you to ladles of love? What calls you to all of the things that you do not just in this environment, but in the community. What is God saying to you? And what are you saying to God? Be sure to listen, because I got to tell you, if he can grab somebody like Saul and turn him into Paul, then he sure as heck can do things with us that we would never expect. He does it to you. He's got a hold of you. He's got a plan for you. And I will guarantee you that God's hold on you is not made out of toilet paper. It's a lot stronger than that. It will not let you go. Our struggle is how to say, okay, Lord, take me where you'll take me and tell me what to do. Even though he became Paul, it wasn't easy for Saul. If you read all of his letters, or if you're familiar with all of them, what Paul constantly talks about his thorn in the flesh. And no one really has yet made a convincing argument for exactly what that thorn in the flesh is. Some think that perhaps he was epileptic. Some people said he couldn't talk right. That he was epileptic. I got that one out. Others think that it may have been a matter of his sexuality, that Paul may have in fact have been gay. Boy, bring that up in the Lutheran Church the last 10 years and you could get a lot of conversation going. Paul maybe he had a deformity. We don't know, because we don't have any pictures of Paul, and no one ever comments on any kind of deformity. But there was something that for him daily was a thorn in the flesh that he had to deal with. We know, and Paul knows, that he had a really bad tendency to be too boastful. If you read some of his letters, he gets kind of full of himself from time to time, and then he apologizes for being so boastful. He doesn't apologize for representing God. It's only when Paul gets in the way, when Paul gets boastful, that he has to apologize. He has a short temper. Read the letter, read 1 Corinthians. You want to see a mad letter? Paul was not happy with those folks. And he gives them what for. We tend to look at 1 Corinthians as being a really happy place with great visions of the church. But that's the second half. The first half is Paul saying, who the heck do you think you are, and why are you behaving this way? Do you not know that you are called by God? So, Saul is called to be Paul, and Paul calls for the church. And the church becomes St. Paul's, which ought to remind us whenever we see that word, St. Paul, who was he and why? Who is he? He's our greatest theologian in the New Testament. And why do we like his name so well? Because he epitomizes everything that God does with us. He calls us, he changes us, and he will not let us go. We have an unbroken connection to God. For that, we give great thanks. Let us pray. Gracious God, we give you thanks for Paul. We give you thanks for Saul. We give you thanks that you consider us your children, that you call to us, that you reach out to us and offer us all that we need. And all that you ask is that we walk with you, that we search for you in all people, that we treat all people as though you are there, and you are. And we try to show the rest of the world what love is about. Amen.